Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm not Emily, thank goodness. Emily is taking a night off and spending time with her family, which was wonderful. So I'm your host for this evening. I'm Ed. If you don't know me already, I'm the music director here at Christ Church, and I want to introduce our soloist, Patrick Peavy. Patrick, welcome to Christ Church. We're so glad to have you. I know Patrick through several avenues of Detroit. I know him through our work together, the Community Chorus of Detroit. Patrick has sung in many choruses around the city. He studied at Oakland University. He's sung in many choruses around town. And he's a presence. If you're a singer, you might have run into Patrick at somewhere along the way. So. And because Patrick is able to sing so low, that it's a voice that's more rare than you might think. But it's interesting, we were rehearsing tonight, and I was thinking, I've been billing you as a basso profundo, and you're singing a high F above middle C tonight, so barely. But we're so glad to have you tonight, Patrick. Thanks for being here. When I was speaking with Reverend Emily about spirituals and why spirituals again, we keep returning to spirituals for the Deep River series in Lent. My goal, as it turns out, I have to wear two hats this evening. I have one hat for Christ Church and I have another hat for the Community Chorus of Detroit. And often my speech is the same when it comes to spirituals, because for many of us, this was not part of our tradition. Regardless of skin color, spirituals have not always been part of our tradition. If you grew up Catholic, if you grew up a certain kind of Protestant, if you didn't go to church at all, perhaps spirituals are not in your vocabulary. And what I want for this parish and what I want for members of the chorus to understand is that spirituals have a currency, if you will. If you think of them as a commodity, if you think of them as a vehicle, putting aside their historical significance, the symbolic meanings behind many of the spirituals, putting all of that aside for just a second, because those are important things. But if you think about the genre of the spiritual and the culture of black folk who endured such pain for so long and that are willing to share their history with us, that is of, to me, the utmost significance. And I think, and I might be stepping a bit too far, but I really think it's up to Americans to own up to black history and to claim black history as our own history. And we do that in music through spirituals. And I'm so grateful to the black community who has taught us, who has shared their stories, has shared their history with music. And Al was here last week, a parishioner, and he was telling me we didn't have a piano growing up. We just sang. We just sang, and you learned by being at the knee of the person who was older than you, whether that being a parent or a grandparent or a sibling, and they taught you what you needed to know, this oral tradition. So I really want to build our fluency in this currency. Let's see. Okay, so we have some water themes. And I have to share an inside story. When I was working at Central Methodist, that was the church I was working before I got here. That's the church right next to Comerica Park, across from the Fox Theater. And that was right at the time that the Super Bowl was here. And I don't know, there was a silly cartoon that was going on in a chain. Remember chain emails? And there was this chain email, and I made very good friends with members of my choirs, and so this email went out, and it was a joke, and it said, and this was, so at the time of the Super Bowl, if you'll remember, there was a new bar opening on every corner every week, and our goal was always try to get to, to keep up with the ones that were opening. And so there was this joke that said, the pastor got into the pulpit, and he said, all these terrible vices, and if I had all the vodka in the world, I'd take it down to the river and I'd dump it. And if I had all the beer in the world, I'd take it down to the river and I'd dump it. And if I had all the wine in the world, I'd take it and down to the river and I'd dump it in. This long sermon, after which the organist got up and said, "We shall now sing, 'We Shall Gather at the River.'" So I, in my mind, I have that humor when we speak about Deep River, because the river is that gathering place. The river in spirituals, Howard Thurman writes, "Deep River is perhaps the most universal in insight, and certainly the most intellectual of all the spirituals. It thinks of life in terms of a river. Of course, it must be added that to these early singers, slaves as they were, practically the river may never have been for many the last and most formidable barrier to freedom. And of course, if you don't know how to swim, even more so. To slip over the river from one of the border states would mean a chance for freedom in the north, or to cross the river into Canada would mean freedom in a new country, a foreign land. But let us reflect in a deeper meaning here. To think of life as being like a river is full and creative analogy." And then he goes on to develop the metaphor, likening the life of a river to the movement of human existence. The river begins as a mere stream, then becomes a river wearing down the riverbanks, then disperses itself into a wider ocean. As the river shifts and bends, Thurman claims the human life also bends and shifts, participating in a process of changing, growing, giving, and moving through time. And I love that. So, spiritual scholar Eileen Gunther provides a list of 14 spirituals that mention the River Jordan. Example, Roll, Jordan, Roll was the initial entry in the first major collection of spirituals published after the Civil War, Slave Songs of the United States in 1867. Swing Low is another one. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. So while, I think so much of references, whether they be biblical or even as simple as a river, kind of get lost on us in this century, because we think of technology, we think of vehicles to get us through where we need to go, and we need to think of life without those things. Throughout scriptures, especially the Hebrew scriptures, the River Jordan is a recurring theme, both as a geographic location and as a boundary beyond which deliverance was possible. For enslaved Africans, deliverance could be freedom from bondage in both this life and the next. So we're going to sing. The first thing we're going to do is sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And I should get you a hymnal, Patrick. If there's an extra lift every voice and sing for Patrick, that would be great. Thank you. But we're going to sing it together. But before we do, here's its origin. So one story included in John Wesley Works, the second folk song of the American Negro from 1915, describes a young mother, Sarah Hannah Shepherd, who was to be sold to the South and separated from her infant daughter. Knowing that being sent to Mississippi from Tennessee was essentially a death sentence, Hannah planned to kill herself and her baby to avoid that fate. And it wasn't that uncommon. And the author vividly narrates this experience. An old mammy, seeing the terrible expression on her face and hearing these words, read her intentions. In love, she laid her dear old hand upon the shoulder of the distressed mother and said, "Don't you do it, honey. Wait, let the chariot of the Lord swing low, and let me take one of the Lord's scrolls and read it to you." Then, making a motion as reaching for something and unrolling it, she read, "God's got a great work for this baby to do. She's going to stand before kings and queens. Don't you do it, honey." The mother was so impressed with the words of the old mammy, she gave up her fell design and allowed herself to be taken off down into Mississippi, leaving her baby behind. Incredibly, incredibly painful. Based on other writings of the same author, one can wonder whether this story is historical or apocryphal. What is undoubtedly historical is that the baby girl in the story was Ella Shepherd, who later became one of the founding members of the Fisk University Singers, which we heard about last week from Emily, for whom she provided musical direction from 1871 to 1879. She fulfilled the prophecy the mammy offered during this time, and she sang, as she sang, and the singers sang for Queen Victoria on the European tour of 1873. So, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. It's number 18 in Lift Every Voice and Sing. We're fortunate. I don't know how many parishes you go to around the Diocese of Michigan, but you should maybe look around when you visit other parishes and look and see what kind of hymnals they have in the pew. It's not often you find Lift Every Voice and Sing or any other the supplemental hymnals in the pew. And I think we're so lucky to have this resource here. So number 18, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And if you notice, it's not incredibly harmonious. There's not a lot of harmony there. Just these single notes. Swing low, sweet chariot. So because of that, I'm going to suggest that we sing it a cappella. You up for that? Awesome. 4 verses, and they all have a refrain, and we start with the refrain. 2, 3, 4. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Verse 2. If you get before I do, coming for to carry me home, tell all my friends I'm coming too, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. The coming for to carry me home. When Jesus washed my sins away, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I'm sometimes up and sometimes I'm down, coming for to carry me home. But still my soul feels heavenly bound, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Yeah, good, 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 good on you, as my friend says. Okay, so Patrick is going to come up and sing Deep River, but before he does, I wanted to talk about it and its origin, and then we'll talk about maybe what he thinks about when he sings it or what memories it brings out for you. So, though it may seem as if we've always known this spiritual Deep River, it was not until the second decade of the 20th century that it came into American consciousness more broadly. By early in the 20th century, however, publications of this spiritual significantly changed from its earlier form. Remember, that's an oral tradition that's getting written down, and even if you compare one spiritual to the same spiritual in another hymnal, they don't always agree. And I noticed while we were singing Swing Low, everybody wanted to change the harmony and some different harmonies that aren't in that hymnal, which is fine. But it's just that we've all learned it from a different source. So this also was changed, Deep Rivers. The Fisk Jubilee singers included this song in their concerts, and the first print version of Deep River, and for that matter, the first mention of the spiritual is found in the story of the Fisk Jubilee Singers with their songs beginning in 1877. The version not only records an extended refrain that repeats the final phrase 3 times, I want to cross over into campground, but also provides 3 stanzas. Oh, don't you want to go to that gospel feast, that promised land where all is peace? Lord, I want to cross over into campground. And that was repeated 3 more times. Second verse, I'll go into heaven and take my seat. Cast my crown at Jesus' feet. And then another verse, oh, when I get to heaven, I walk all about. There's nobody there for to turn me out. The stanzas suggest hope, a peaceful hope, a relationship with Jesus, and the freedom to walk all about, because they didn't have that freedom. Congregational versions found in hymnals usually include only the shortened refrain and the first stanza. So rather than the slower melancholy arrangements of the earliest 20th century, the Fisk version is composed in a steady, kind of militant style and moves between the major and the relative minor keys. Later arrangements are decidedly in a major tonality. So That's maybe more than you ever wanted to know about Deep River. But I love Deep River, not just because of the joke I told earlier, but because we're by the river. We're always reminded that life is the river, and we have this permanent reminder here in Detroit. So with that, if you would, please. Oh, and this arrangement is by Moses Hogan. Bravo. So, why? Why did you choose? Because you had complete freedom.
So, I don't think I need this. Okay. Deep River is my favorite spiritual. It was my introduction. Spirituals in itself was my introduction into the whole classical realm. So this was the first spiritual that I learned when I was in high school, actually. I sung it at um, State Soul Ensemble Festival, and it was one of my competition pieces, and I have loved it ever since I was at Martin Luther King under Miss Alice Faye Allen Lloyd, rest in peace to her. But it is what makes it with all spirituals, but this especially, spirituals as a young African American man, it is the single emotion, the closest you can get to understanding the emotions of my ancestors through this music. And what has always been so impactful about this piece in particular is obviously spirituals were also songs of cold, to Underground Railroad and, Jordan meant, crossing here, crossing there, but people who were experiencing so much trauma that the only escape for them was to die and to be welcomed into the arms of the promised land and into the arms of the Lord. So that has always tugged at my emotional purse strings. And that is one of the reasons why, well, one, the title of the series was Deep River, so of course I had to sing Deep River, but that is the main, the main purpose that I sing this song. Moses Hogan. Like with everything, she wants to know how the other arrangements are done. Like with most spirituals, there's a variety. As Ed stated, this song in particular, it's been more in the major key signatures. So in my experiences with theirs, is it Harold Johnson, the other one? The Burleigh. I don't really like that, but Moses is my favorite. And there's a variety, with his life. This is all into the interpretation, the emotion of the composer. So
they were meant to. They started out as not concert pieces. They
right.
started out as work songs.
Right.
As
songs, code. Yeah.
And then the coded messages, songs of freedom. But yeah, so. I've met people. I've met choral instructors who totally believed that spirituals should not be arranged, that we should sing them the way they were. They were meant to be a cappella, and they were meant to be sung at home or in your daily life, and that's the way one woman in particular that I can think of did that. But my argument was always, then how do I learn them? Because I'm not home with you. How do I learn them? So I need the arrangement. What else? Megan.
So it's a comment, not a question, but Ed, picking up on what you just said, I've heard this piece I don't know how many times in how many ways, and this one, notwithstanding the fact that it was arranged by a really well-known person, you sing it like there is nobody else on the planet at the moment. And part of that's your voice. Part of that is the commitment to the length of the
And a lot of that for me is due to the genius that is Moses Hogan. He is firstly is a pianist, and the accompaniment is that starts you, and then it's the emotional string. I don't want to cry, sing, but it is truly my favorite thing in the world.
That does the surprise harmonies.
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic piece.
I was wondering about the phrase Passover to campground, and wondering why campground for the Negro was an image of heaven,
I,
campground.
I'm not certain.
That's why campground is a image of heaven. I think it was just a different place. It was the place at the end of the journey. Maybe I really shouldn't say it more than that.
Yeah.
Isn't historically, though, around the time of the Civil War, campground actually comes into a number of songs, and of Union Army, I'm thinking of, there's one, but also there were religious experiences. People had gatherings for one, like a week, for a community, and it would be at a
In a
campground.
campground.
So maybe it was from that, and then imagining the campground in heaven.
How about that?
Yeah.
Eric?
Another view maybe that you're looking at resting places along the Underground Railroad.
Right. Yeah.
Campgrounds is like where you're going to get to where you're safe
Yeah.
until the next time you have to move out of that safe place to the dangerous
Yeah.
place until you get to the next thing.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
That's just
Could you repeat that? Because
Yes. So the campground being a symbol on the Underground Railroad as a safe place, a resting point on the journey. So the question was, why is campground seen as as heaven or as a place of rest? And we surmised that much. Cool. All right, let's move on. Let's see. On remembering. We are going to sing together later Calvary, which is interesting to me because that is one spiritual I didn't know. I had to learn it this week. And just to give you a foretaste of it. It's very similar to I Want Jesus to Walk with Me. We can bear that in mind. But before we sing, there's some things about the spirituals. Before, I've got something to say about Were You There, which is Patrick's other solo. And I was supposed to read an opening poem. All I have to do is find it. There it is. So, the poem by Langston Hughes. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. You should have reminded me that I forgot to read it. Okay. On remembering. Just got to find my notes. That's that. Like most spirituals, the origins of them are impossible to trace, born not from the pen of an individual, but born out of the communal experience. So there were several, and the one we're going to talk about, were you there? So the series of questions that forms the basis of the song is obviously not to be meant to be taken literally. None of us were physically present at the Passion of Christ. Rather, the questions are meant to function as a form of anamnesis. That's one of Emily's words. From the Greek, literally means to remember, yet it is much more than simple mental recall of an event. It calls the community to remember, to put back together the past to the present, to bring these historic events to bear on the now and make them a part of our story. So at the Passover Seder, when Jews continued to proclaim at the Passover Seder, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God took us out. That's anamnesis. Am I saying that correctly? Anamnesis. That word. I'll just point to you and you say it, Mary. So, like, Were You There is a song that is meant to bring the past events of Christ's suffering and death into the present and transform us by its light. Yet if our experience and this exercise only includes Christ's passion, it is incomplete. The song also calls us to put back together, to remember the African American slave experience out of which the song arose. James Cone, in The Cross and the Lynching Tree, his book, he writes, "In the mystery of God's revelation, Black Christians believe that just knowing that Jesus went through an experience of suffering in a manner similar to theirs gave them faith that God was with them, even in suffering on a lynching tree, just as God was present with Christ in suffering on the cross." The spiritual remembered the suffering of Christ to the suffering of that community, and with its inherent promise of God's presence and resurrection power. So the continuing influence, like any hymn or song that has achieved such prominence, the message quickly expanded beyond its initial context. The African American pastor, author, and civil rights leader Howard Thurman gives one poignant example in his memoir, With Head and Heart. On a trip to India, he and his wife, Sue, had the honor of meeting with Mahatma Gandhi. After a wonderful conversation, the talk took a surprising turn as the Thurmans prepared to leave. Thurman notes, "But before we left, he asked, will you do me a favor? Will you sing one of your songs for me? Will you sing, 'Were You There When They Crucified My Lord?'" Gandhi continued, "I feel that this song gets to the root of the experience of the entire human race, under the spread of the healing wings of suffering." While the story could be told simply to marvel at the image that Howard and Sue Thurman singing, "Were You There?" with Gandhi in his ashram tent, it also shows the power and affect of the spiritual. And while the influence of Gandhi's philosophy and nonviolent resistance on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the burgeoning civil rights movement has been well documented, perhaps we see here how the influence was reciprocal. And this song, born from the crucible of suffering, spoke to any and all around the world who faced oppressions of every kind. So it's interesting to see the power of the spiritual and its reach, and in the sharing of this culture and this music and these stories, it changed my life, and it probably changed your life too. I think I didn't grow up in a church singing spirituals, and what Patrick was speaking about, how it got to the root of him, I think spirituals get to the root of us and Gandhi and anybody who's willing to see that humanity and recognize our failing as a human race. Is that Lent enough for you, or what? Okay, we're going to sing Calvary. How are we doing on time? Oh yeah, plenty of time. Calvary, number 32, and this one is with piano. If you like to stand, you may. So, were you there? Also arranged by Moses Hogan. You ready, Patrick? Same question.
sorry, I forgot. It's the same sort of with Deep River, just the l- the way that it seems like the linkage between Jesus dying on the cross and, you know, slaves comparing that trauma, that likelihood, that likeness, is kind of the reason why, you know, I like this piece. And also, I just kind of like to sing it, really.
Nice D flat major.
That F is quite something, though, but it's the same. It's just the deep. It's always with the spirituals for me, just the deep emotional connection. It's something that you cannot get through the books, you know. And this is part of the reason why we have music, and I'm blessed to have had teachers who had installed that in us. You know, DPS schools don't always get the best rep, but at my high school, we had a fantastic choir director. Her name was Alice Faye Allen Lloyd. She passed a long time ago, but all of this, what you see here, me standing here performing, I owe some of it to my mother, but I owe a lot of that to her and her influence on my life. So that's kind of it.
Questions for Patrick?
Not my social security number.
Repeat the question.
She asked, where else do I perform and what else do I do? I sing with, my main side gig is singing with Ed in Christchurch, Detroit. I don't really do any solo work. Maybe that's something. I've recently come through a transition that the chorus kind of know about, some of the members know about, and kind of give me a new lease on life and a second chance, in a big way, a second chance. So I want to use my voice more. I did study a long time ago, but I never finished. So part of me wanting to do this with Ed is a way of not only me giving back to those teachers like the one I just mentioned before, but the Lord has given me a gift. And I don't know how else to use it but to use it. So hopefully in the future, there will be more, you know, there will be more. But for now, Ed is singing with Christchurch, the community chorus of Detroit, rather. And I also sing with William Harris Chorale. William Harris is the choral director. He replaced Dr. Harden at Cass Tech. And we have an upcoming concert of the Ordering of Moses by Nathaniel Deet, another prominent African-American composer. So that's kind of all. Yeah.
Maybe you could let us know if it's open to the public.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Also, I wonder, have you made any recordings?
Oh, no, no.
You really need to. Those two that you just did,
I am not Beyonce. I may look like her, but maybe something in the future, but
like about next month.
yeah. But thank you all for coming, and thank you all for having me. And it was a great experience being able to share with you some of that which makes me me. And singing these important pieces is definitely something that I keep close to my heart.
Okay, so I heard the bell ring, so we're going to have our closing prayer and be on our way. So this is the poem. It's called From A Black and Unknown Bards by James Weldon Johnson, who lived from 1871 to 1938, and this poem was written in 1922. O black and unknown bards of long ago, how came your lips to touch the sacred fire? How in your darkness did you come to know the power and beauty of the minstrel's lyre? Who first from midst his bonds lifted his eyes? Who first from out of the still watch, lone and long, feeling the ancient faith of prophets rise within his dark-kept soul, burst into song? Heart of what slave poured out such melody as "Steal Away to Jesus"? On its strains his spirit must have nightly floated free, though still about his hands he felt his chains. Who heard great Jordan roll? Whose starward eye saw a chariot swing low? And who was he that breathed that comforting, melodic sigh? Nobody knows the trouble I see. You sang not deeds of heroes or kings, no chant of bloody war or exulting paean, of arms won triumphs, but your humble strings you touched in chord with music empyrean. You sang far better than you knew, the songs that for your listeners' hungry hearts sufficed, still live. But more than this, to you belongs. You sang a race from wood and stone to Christ.